Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission Podcast. My name is Rebecca Toomey, and we are on a mission to encourage and inspire you as you're navigating through your life and with your relationship with Christ. We have been in a series on being countercultural, and as listeners of this show will know, we love talking about birth and, of course, God's design for birth. And our guest today has a really unique story and has broken free from the medical model when it comes to birth. Dr. Nathan Riley is a board-certified OB-GYN who's left the medical industrial complex, really due to his disillusionment with the standard of care that was provided there within that conventional maternity care model. And this was hard because going with the flow of the hospital-based practices was providing him financial security. But on the other hand, standing in his truth and from having sat with over 1,000 births and connecting with women and their families, this provided him a lifestyle with more alignment with his own journey as a father and deepening his connection with his wife, caring for people in the way that he had anticipated long before stepping into practice. So, Dr. Riley now focuses his time on upholding the traditional practice of midwifery. He supports midwives as a collaborative physician for midwives of all varieties in over 20 states, and he is an advocate for home birth and still attends births for those in need. He boasts a C-section rate of less than 5%, which is one of the best in the US. And his mission is to uphold midwifery as the art that it is and to honor birth as a sacred process and the transition into parenthood as a spiritual transformation. So Dr. Riley is focused on empowering women to have their babies on their own terms, using nature as our guide. And he also helps fathers embrace the opportunity to connect with birth and their partners through pregnancy and birth, encouraging them to go deeper versus distancing themselves from the stigmatized but magical rite of passage. Dr. Riley is a father of two, the second of whom was born at home, and he is proudly married to his high school sweetheart. In his spare time, he walks in the woods, makes dad jokes, paints, and drinks coffee with amazing people. You can find Nathan on Instagram at Nathan Riley OB-GYN. Or there are some other resources I'm going to post in the show notes for this, for his other Instagram accounts like Born Free Method. But Nathan/Dr. Riley, whatever you want me to call you.
Nathan's good. Yeah.
Thank you for joining
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. That was a great introduction. I could have written it myself, I think.
I think you might have had a little hand in it. Now, I'm going to give our audience the caveat that today's episode is a little bit different than usual. You know, usually we jump into things and just kind of start talking, but it sounds to me from what I've seen on Instagram that you have been on a lot of podcasts for interviews with a lot of folks that agree with a lot of what you're saying or all of it. And something that you specifically requested for the first 6 months of 2025 is that you would only agree to come on a podcast if the person or people didn't agree with everything that you had to say. And it was more of kind of a healthy debate type of format. Is that accurate? An accurate
Yeah.
summary?
Yeah. You're actually the first person to take me up on it. I had a number of people in sort of a very what's the word? A kind of an uncanny sort of suspicious way want to bump my next interviews up about 5 months. So I appreciate the opportunity always to come on and to really be objective, I guess, and humble when we speak about some of these topics, because I certainly don't have all the answers. And frankly, the reason I posed that challenge to people, which I thought would be like the people with real conventional OB-GYN podcasts would bring me on and just want to like harangue me. I would be okay
Mhm,
with it.
mhm,
But the reason is that there is like a real lack of curiosity, and I really don't know. Like I really don't have any answers. And the
mhm,
more I'm doing this, the less answers are really coming to me, and more questions I'm generating. So I would love for people to appreciate that somebody who says that they're speaking the truth. I don't mean the capital T truth, like something that you experience deep in prayer or in your sleep, and you're like, "Whoa, that was a weird thing. I can't prove it, but it happened."
mhm,
Um, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like the data shows and the science shows. It's like you you've lost your way because we really can't ever know the ultimate. subtlety truth of this stuff, especially when we're talking about childbirth. So
Mhm.
so let's let it rock. Let's just
Mhm.
let's just riff for a while and have some fun with this. And I will be happy to say I don't know if you can push me into a corner that forces my hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I told you before we started that there is a lot that I do agree with you on. There
Yeah,
are a lot of things that I see your post and I'm like, yes, yes, that resonates. I get it. I also really appreciate what you're trying to do, what your mission is now that you've left the system. So it's interesting because you 5 or 10 years ago, I'm sure we would have had a
yeah.
lot more to disagree on. And it sounds like you want to have those conversations, but I bet you all the OB-GYNs are scared because they know that they don't know.
Well, no, that's actually a really great place to start, which is if somebody's going to challenge me, it's hard. This is the reason that these conversations don't happen. I'm not like advertising something that is completely goofy, like that
Mhm,
is not in direct experience, right? For many women who've had babies. I'm saying that there's probably a way of going about this that does not beg for more intervention, more pharmaceuticals, and more interruption. That's all that my whole jam comes down to this. And frankly, whenever people do go into a sort of debate forum, we don't really have those anymore. I kind of wish we did, but
mhm,
they would say, well, it's on me or you or whoever to prove, I'm using air quotes for
mhm,
those listening, to prove to me that Pitocin is bad, or that circumcision is bad, or that whatever, induction of labor is bad. And by the way, none of these things are categorically bad or good. It's for this individual who's here, this is not the thing that they want, nor do I think it's actually the thing that's beneficial. But the point is that if you're going to put that pressure on me to demonstrate that Pitocin is patently bad for all women going in through childbirth, that's the wrong question. The burden of evidence is on the person who wants to deviate from the natural order of things. And this gets into the spirituality piece or even the religious piece, um, which I think we in the medical community have become so far removed from that we have stopped even listening to our own internal voice. Or like again, like what I was saying is like something that came to you, that like moment, that epiphany that happened to you. Like it's okay to listen to that voice, even if the doctors and the nurses and whatever don't agree with it or the data doesn't support it. That's you. Like I want to know that about you. And that ultimately becomes the most real thing in the world. So the burden of evidence is on the person who wishes to deviate from nature. And we've deviated so far from nature that I don't even think we understand properly how basic biology works.
mm. Yeah. I understand what you're saying. I would like to let's dig into the spiritual aspect a little bit. You know that this is a
Yeah,
Christian podcast. I
totally.
get the sense from what I see, and again, this is me making an assumption, right, based on not knowing that you and I are both talking about spirituality, but in a different way, perhaps. When I refer to, and this is where I need you to correct me if I'm wrong, but when I refer to having a spiritual experience, I'm having an experience with Yahweh, God, the God of the Bible.
Yeah.
When you're talking about having a spiritual experience, who is your spiritual experience with?
That's a really great question. And I really appreciate the question. And you notice my eyes are deviating left and right because I don't know if I have a really good answer for that.
Okay.
Um, I guess it's probably important, if I'm going to slam the medical doctors and whatnot, I have to relate to them as well. You get into this motif of understanding the human experience, and you cut it up into its constituent parts, and you decide what you like and what you don't like. And that doesn't leave a lot of room for the mystery. And when I was growing up as a young child, I was never brought to church. I was never it wasn't never a part of our holiday experience, like around Christmas. It was something that my mother and father had both strayed from for their own reasons. And my mother's reason, I think she was, well, I know she was raised Greek Orthodox, and my father was a Lutheran. They, my mother, specifically had a real hard time remaining um, in her faith, staying with her faith that she was brought up with after spending so much time in the pediatric ICU and seeing so many children die. That sometimes draws people closer to God. For her, it pushed her away from her religion, and she became what I guess you would call agnostic, although I don't think that people use that term appropriately. And as a consequence of that, when she and my father had children, we weren't brought in, but there was a lot of questions circulating, and most of our family is very religious. So we had the opportunity to ask them lots of questions. And I, at an early age, started having some very, very unusual experiences that brought me back to what you might call God and what I might call God. But I never put a label on it. It was this sort of connection to something greater than myself, which was a bit of a surrender. And when I was in churches, there was one in particular in Pittsburgh where I grew up, where we went to which holiday was it? It must have been around, you know what, it was probably around Three Kings, which is an Orthodox, celebrating the exact same thing, but it's like based on the lunar calendar, I think, something like that. Anyways, we were in a church, and it was in this like old cathedral where there was a pipe organ, and was humming the same tone, and I was like, whoa, this is a lot. This is great. Like you can feel like you get it. You're like, oh, I understand why people go into these beautiful cathedrals. And my wife is Mexican, and going into those cathedrals there was the same thing. Like there's so much power there. Um, and so these little bits of information of experience, I suppose, kind of stuck with me. And then I had the joy of sitting in childbirth, and I was like, God, God, God comes into my mouth more than I guess I would even guess. Um, there's
Coming
something
for you.
magical happening here. Yeah, yeah, right, right. There's something here that is so much more important than what I learned about the human experience in the basic biology of anatomy and physiology. And even if we were to go way, way back in time, there was this tension between the people who wanted to cut open bodies, and there was the church and the state, which didn't want us to do that because, we would be disrupting this person's, posthumous experience after they die. But then, people like Descartes and some others, they convinced the church that, hey, the soul is separate from the body. So we can operate on the body and cut it up and understand its parts without ever disrupting the soul or the spirit. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, the pendulum hasn't really swung back to the center. And so the practice of medicine um, has been a confrontation to a lot of spirituality. And so much so that if something isn't fixed by a pharmaceutical or a surgical steel, like a scalpel, it's considered not, it's considered woo woo, or it's considered, oh, you religious quacks or whatever. And that was actually a big part of what drew me away from the conventional model. Is like, guys, there is far more here to Rebecca's birth experience than the scalpels and the pharmaceuticals and the vital signs. Like that was, for all intents and purposes, a spiritual experience as much as it was what they would believe is a medical procedure.
Hmm.
So I found this strange
Absolutely.
tension, not being a religious person, but witnessing this, the magic, I mean, truly the awe of childbirth, and realizing I don't know if I can do it that way because I'm here with these women and the midwives and whatnot who actually are treating this more as a spiritual rite of passage, a
Mhm.
conversation with God, one foot in the grave. I mean, I've heard all of these terms and I've adopted them myself, which compels you to, in the very least, reconfigure yourself around the religiosity of life itself. So I know that's not the answer that you were maybe expecting, but perhaps in
Sure.
30 years I will be able to put a label to it. um, what's interesting is even though I was not raised as most Christians were, when I got into the end of life care, which is my fellowship training in hospice and palliative medicine, the Christians loved me because I somehow get it, even though I came about it in a very, very like long roundabout way, So,
That's
so
interesting. It sounds like you are right there, that you
yeah,
understand that God exists and that there's something more, but maybe there is something blocking you from just maybe it's an experience that you have yet to have with Jesus himself to
yeah,
say, this I am the way and the truth and like it sounds like you have a very good understanding of Christianity and what it is for the most part, given that you weren't completely, raised in it, like you said. But yeah, that's very interesting because you get that this there's a spiritual side of things,
Yeah.
and now there's like another step deeper. I don't know, man. I think the Lord's calling you to something, and maybe maybe through this he'll pull it out a little bit. But
I'm open. I'm open.
I
An
like
open door.
that. Oh, that's great. So is it Jesus that holds you back, or what is it?
Do you mean like what
Like
like
what is
prohibits me
stopping
from
you
going
from being
one?
like, I understand that there is a God. This experience is bringing women birth. We'll use birth as the
Yeah.
example. You could use end of life care too, but birth is bringing women to this point of where they are breaking into themselves and becoming a new version of themselves when they go from that maiden to mother. And they have many times, like you said, women have spiritual experiences with God
Mm.
during that. And I guess my question is more of, I don't know. I feel like you're saying there's something there and there is a higher power, but you're just not sure of exactly who he is. But I don't know. Is that an assumption?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I want to add one more thing. You are my only guest that did not share a Bible verse. Even
Oh,
Dr.
I know.
Stu, who is not a he is technically Jewish, but not practicing. Even he gave me a Bible verse. So I'm
You did.
curious.
Wow. Look at that.
I'm curious why.
Amen. N and one. Um, why? Well, there was something very scary that happened to me. Um, and it's not like a near-death experience, nothing like that. It was when I was about eight. Let's see, how old was I? How old are we when we were in like first grade? Like seven or something?
Yeah,
7 or 8,
something like
something like
that.
that.
Hmm.
Um, I was 7 or 8 years old, probably in first. It had to be later than that. That seems too young. Anyways, I was like very probably under 10,
Okay.
and I was in a minivan of one of probably my best friend at the time, and his mom had asked me at some point about religion, and I was a little kid. I had no real connection to. I don't even know if I had the language. But I said, "Oh no, we don't go to church." I went back to like playing with my things, and she said, "Oh well, so you haven't been baptized?" And I said, "I don't know what that is." She was like, "Oh well, you're probably gonna." She said something along. I don't want to misquote her, but it was something like, "You're gonna burn in hell because you weren't baptized." And
Extreme.
as a little kid, that was a little much. That was a little too much for me. It actually made me
Yeah.
afraid to speak about religion for at
Mm.
least a decade,
Wow.
probably until college. And I had some like really cool liberal arts teachers that like made it fun to talk about again.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
that could have been an impediment. I don't think that that's like something that is an active impediment for me. What I
Hmm.
will say is that having been out in California, I took care of so many different people of so many different faiths that I was like, God, this is like I actually started envying people for having such a close connection to some organization around this conversation of spirituality, you know.
Mm.
And there were Buddhists, there was Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, I mean, you name it. We had such a colorful diaspora represented in California, and they all seemed to say the same thing, but they use different language to say it. And I thought there was some beauty in that. So much so that it actually maybe felt like, gosh, there isn't actually a right one here. And maybe I'm wrong. Like I'm okay to that, that perhaps I'm wrong, but it seemed like the most religious people were totally cool with all of the other religions, and they all were like, we're all talking about the same thing. And I was like, man, that's kind of cool. Like I hadn't really had a reasonable conversation, like a heart-to-heart conversation in that way. And I was having that with my clients. In fact, one of my good friends, they're still in San Diego. They're super religious. We actually went to their church after the birth of their daughter. I was their doctor that was on call. And um, there was something about him describing like surfing that was because he's not in San Diego that he was like it's kind of like being in church and feeling that love is kind of like surfing, and I was like, whoa, like this is so much different from that conversation in the minivan where I was told like, oh, this is something you do or you're gonna burn in hell, and I was like, whoa, there's not a lot of love there. but like in these, this new iteration of my sort of adult life,
Hmm.
that was definitely, there was so much more love there. So maybe it's just a gradual pull, but
Yeah.
there's not like an intentional barrier or anything I can identify as an obstacle. It's just I've got a lot of friends with different religious upbringings, and
Hmm.
the people I love the most are those that are um, like they really believe it, and they also I don't know if this is the right way to put it, but it's like they don't take it too seriously because like they have such a close connection themselves, and they're like, yeah, like you'll get there or something like that. I don't know.
I do think you'll get there.
Yeah.
That's interesting what you had to say about the kind of all religions. We kind of refer to that as having almost even a one world religion, which is what
Mm,
the Catholic Pope is kind of trying to usher in a bit, which is there's a prophetic aspect to that from a biblical context that there will be that push at a point in time from a prophetic standpoint of a one world church or one world
mm,
religion. So it's kind of interesting when you look at it from the history of Christianity and the history of faith. But I want to speak to what that person said to you about baptism, which, first of
yeah.
all, is false. Baptism is doesn't make you anything. Baptism isn't going to make you go to heaven. From a biblical standpoint, baptism is an outward reflection of an inward choice. So
Mm.
it's kind of like a marriage ceremony. When you get married,
Oh yeah.
you're married on paper, right? But when you have a marriage ceremony, you are showing it's a public confession to others that you're choosing to love that person for the rest of your and their lives. Baptism, from, like I said, from a New Testament biblical perspective, is supposed to be the same way. You have chosen to follow Jesus Christ or Yeshua, however you want to pronounce his name, because that's a whole other conversation of how Jesus' name has progressed linguistically. But you're a follower of Jesus and you're showing others that you're a follower of Jesus and that you have accepted him into your life, then you get baptized.
Mm,
But because a lot of these Orthodox or Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, like you said, I'm just, in general, kind of Polish, Romanian Orthodox churches, they still have a lot of traditions of child baptism. And it's
mm.
kind of, honestly, it's just a little superstitious. It's like, let's sprinkle a little water, protect them, just in case. You never know.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying from the perspective of there's so many religions, how would I or how could I choose just one? And I think that what I would use as my argument, if we were having a debate,
Yeah.
which we kind of are, is that the Bible teaches us that Yeshua, Jesus, is the only way to God. And that's in John chapter 14. Now, Islam denies that Jesus is the Son of God, but they also acknowledge that he walked the earth.
Mm,
And other historical texts, Jesus is actually one of the most cited in historical texts that he existed. So it wasn't like people just made this up and say he existed. There's all this corroborating text to say Jesus was a real person. And for me, from a faith perspective, I think the strongest argument is that his disciples followed him and spread the word of who he was and the miracles that he performed to the point of being brutally murdered themselves. Like all of them died horrific deaths. Like, would you say that someone did or was something they weren't if it meant that you were going to get literally physically crucified for it? I
yeah.
feel like that's pretty compelling. Now, I believed in Jesus long before that was an argument that I could understand as a child, but it was more because I felt the presence of God, similar to the way that you feel the presence of God when you are attending births or you're going through this experience. Now, I'm putting aside a lot of these other religions like Hinduism and Buddhism are not about a personal relationship with God. There's a lot of it's a mono God where there's lots of different gods. So I think that they're a little bit different in the conversation when it comes to the conversation. And here, like my thing is, it's not about who is right. at the end of the day,
Mm,
right? Like it's not about who has all of the answers, because I think that that's one of the ways we can get into hot water is to be like, oh, well, I'm right. And I'm right because of this. Like God will reveal himself. He
mm,
reveals himself to us and who he is. And at the end of the day, like that's for me personally, having had those experiences with him. The first experience I ever had with God, I was young, 4 or 5 years old, and I was in my front yard and I just felt the presence of God. And I saw this almost, I don't know if you've ever seen different artwork of, faith artwork. Like, they have the pictures of Jesus and of Mary, and
yeah.
sometimes you'll see the hand of God. It was something
Mm,
similar to that, where I just had this overwhelming, like, vision, almost like you would imagine a cloud in the shape of the hand of God. It was kind of like that. And in that moment, it was like he revealed himself to me. And I'd obviously been hearing about stories of God. Um, and so that was kind of where it started. Now, it's not to say that my life has always been seeking God. I've had moments where I've just lived my life and not worried about that. And he's brought me back. And the reason I feel like he's brought me back and to have these conversations is to spread the good news and to say, like, I gave you guys life and I gave you guys the answers, and you're created in my image. DNA is one of the most incredible creations that there ever could be. And I want you to talk about that and bring light to that, because we've gotten so far away from it, especially with the medical industrial complex that's all about suppressing and controlling bodies instead
mm,
of understanding bodies and why they were created, what their functions are, how they work, what we can do to help heal them. We're so focused on pathologizing them. And, it's like I think about so many older people right now. My mother in law is one of them, other friends, parents, where they're going to hospitals because there's a problem. And with my
yeah.
mother in law, it was that she was having strokes and they missed it twice. She went to the hospital and they're like, oh, well, we don't know. She looks like she has a UTI.
Mm,
And my cousin is a medical doctor, and we downloaded the app to get the paperwork and everything. And she took a look and she's like, she's had a stroke. She needs to go back to another hospital. These hospitals were the ones that were screening for this stuff, right? Like they're the ones who took the tests. All she did was read the results. We ended up taking her to a stroke hospital, a hospital that specializes in strokes. And nowhere in this process was it about, like, let's figure out why you're having strokes. What could be the cause of this? How can we prevent this from happening? It was take this medicine, take this medicine, take this medicine. And my sister kind of made this joke the other day because it was her father-in-law was going through the same thing. That they literally, same thing, brain bleed, figured out, oh, it was a stroke. Oh, he also had a seizure in the hospital. Take these medicines. Goodbye. You'll live for a little while. Goodbye. And I think that that's why I want to kind of shout from the rooftops about God, because when you take God out of this, it becomes transactional and it becomes about, like, how do I just live longer? And what's the point of living anyway, right? Like, what are we living for? If we're just
yeah.
going to take the medicine and live and live and live to stay alive, but not live a healthy or happy or satisfied, like fully living life. I feel like I just talked in a huge circle, but feel free to
Well, no,
jump
but
in.
that's good. So um, where does God come in the relationship that the layperson has to, let's just say, the healing arts? Like,
Mm.
where does God come in there?
In all of it, in my opinion, because he created us and he gave us the tools that we need. He gave us every plant and animal and fruit and vegetable and everything that we have in front of us to heal. And in many senses, this is going to be me starting to talk about corruption and, become a conspiracy
Yeah.
theorist and all that stuff. But, you probably know from studying medicine that 120, 150 plus years ago, people were still using natural remedies to heal illnesses and sickness. And they were using things that came out of the ground and creating concoctions and all that good stuff to help heal until people realized that they could make money off
Yeah.
of pharma. And so my opinion is that pharmakia, the word pharmakia is used in the Bible in a biblical context, and it actually means sorcery and trickery.
Mm.
And so I kind of see that there's two sides to health. There's the side that's like, I want to understand God's creation. I want to understand the human body that he created and how he created it and use these healing modalities that he gave us to heal. And then there's the other side of it, the sorcery side of it, that is all about greed and corruption and money and the love of money that says, yeah, I'm going to help too, but to the extent that no one is going to get healed. They're going to be in a constant cycle. And so it's almost like there are two views on health, in my opinion. There's the, folks that truly want to help other people. And then there's this demonic side, this evil side. There is a biblical context to this. You'd have to go back and listen to some of those episodes, though, Nathan, because
Yeah.
it would take a long time to have that conversation. But there is an explanation in the Bible in Genesis 6 about angels that were cast out of heaven. So think about, from where I sit, I believe that we live in a spiritual realm. It's not just like this 2D kind of humans, like there's us, but there's more. There are other entities aside from just us. And so that's why when I ask the question, you believe in God, what does that mean? Because there are other entities, in my opinion, that walk amongst us or their spirits roam amongst us. And Genesis 6 kind of gives us the, what's the word? The story behind that, because it talks about Lucifer and Satan are different people, by the way, but Lucifer
Yeah.
was an angel and
I was
he
gonna ask. I
wants,
was gonna challenge you on that, but you
yeah,
took it out of
yeah.
my mouth.
They're different. He was cast from heaven because he wanted to be like God. He took a percentage of the angels, a third of the angels with him. And they quickly became corrupt. They lusted after human women. They took them for their wives. They fornicated with human women and created these hybrid humans. And so if we want to look at history and this whole idea of Greek mythology and all these half human, half animal gods, it was probably true. They were probably these, Nephilim is what they call it. And the angels were called the watchers. So there is a biblical context to a lot of stuff that we can't explain today, or in school we're taught like, oh, this is Greek mythology.
Mm.
Mythology meaning not real, but very well could have been real. Now that brings us to the flood. And God literally says in the Bible that he was so disgusted by what he had created that he wanted to start over. He kept one family, and that was Noah and Noah's wife and his children and his children's wives. That was it. That's all he kept. He cleared everybody else out because it had become so corrupt. These Nephilim were cannibals. They were eating each other. It was just this terrible, earth had become this terrible place. But the knowledge that came from, if you think about someone or something, a being an angel or angelic or having not more knowledge than the average human being, coming from heaven, coming to earth, that was when pharmakia was first introduced and these potions and this kind of magic started. It's interesting to me because it kind of it's permeated, it's grown, it's developed. But again, I kind of see that there's two sides to this. There's a side that wants to really help educate people on their bodies and healing them. And then there's this other side that is looking at it from a human or humanistic perspective
Yeah.
and almost wanting to be God instead of learning, all right, how does the liver and the kidneys, how do they work together? What does the gut have to do with all of this? People are finally starting to ask these questions publicly, which is great. But for a long time, this is never something that was talked about. When I was in
Yeah.
my 20s, I never heard conversations like this. It was you go to the doctor gives you a medication. You go to the doctor because your period is heavy and you're bleeding a lot, and they give you a drug, birth control, and say, this is going to fix you. And it doesn't fix you. It's toxic poison that gives you cancer and other problems, leads to more problems. In the long run, can lead to infertility and cancer. So now instead of being helped, you've been poisoned.
Right.
And I don't, the press that I always get from people is like, well, I think that they think that they're doing a good thing. Like doctors, they don't think that they're doing people a disservice. And that's why I think that there is a demonic aspect to this. And when I say demonic, I mean enemy. There's another side. There's a non-God side to this. Because
Yeah.
who would want to destroy God's creation? Not God. So it has to be from the other side. You know what I'm saying? Like there has to
Yeah.
be another force, another spiritual force at war if there are two sides, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah.
And
I
maybe this
actually
is
think
deeper
that
than you wanted to go today, but
no,
here we
no, no,
are.
we haven't gone deep enough, actually.
Good.
The Okay, so as we're talking, I'm noticing there's little things, little resistance points coming up, and maybe this goes back to me not having somebody like you early on in my life who could talk to me about these things in a way that fostered more curiosity as opposed to fostering fear.
Hmm.
And the word you brought up, Lucifer, this fallen angel, is
Hmm.
actually a very sad story, in like as far as stories go. Like this is a
Hmm.
really like wow, what a pitiful creature.
Hmm.
And like you imagine this beautiful angel whose wings are clipped, like falling. I don't know. This is the imagery that comes to mind. But many people hear Lucifer and they think Satan, they think the
Hmm.
devil, they think
Hmm.
that is the demonic antichrist. However, there's some other, and this actually we have to lean into the Eastern philosophies a little bit here. There's another figure named Ahriman, which is actually from the Persian sort of mythologies, so to speak. Not to say I'm not using mythology the way that you used it, where it's like that isn't true. A myth for,
Hmm.
a myth in general is a story that helps us explain the experience of life, right? Or the world, these mythologies. And the rituals, that word I know has a nasty connotation in some circles, but the things that we do on a regular basis, including the rituals, so to speak, of childbirth, actually give they give strength to the mythologies. And the mythology that I've really grappled with throughout the medical training part of my life was this notion that if we can take apart everything that is Rebecca, we should be able to put her back together and she's good as new. And of course, we know that doesn't work any more than it works than that you could take the vitamins and minerals that are in a carrot and put it together and call it a carrot because there's some other essence that is a carrot or an essence that is Rebecca or the tree. You have this living something there.
Hmm.
And so this tendency for us to deconstruct things in order to look at each part individually as opposed to looking at it holistically, which would say that, hey, the sum of your parts is far greater than I'm sorry, Rebecca is far greater than the sum of her parts. That materialistic way of looking at things is very Ahrimanic. It's actually not Luciferic, but this tension between Ahrimanic, which would be the opposite of materialism. I'm sorry, Luciferic, the opposite of materialism. We can call it angelic. And then we have the Ahrimanic, which is grounded and rigid and materialistic. It's that tension between the two that makes human beings, in my sort of way of my worldview, it makes human beings so unique. We actually have this like cosmic antenna pulling the heavens and the earth together. And it's sort of like this channel that forms between us that allows us to have this sort of Christ-like experience. Like it's almost like that's the purpose of human beings in some regard. And the reason that this is relevant to the materialistic medical construct that so many people are trying to leave is we actually need a little bit more of this lighter Luciferic quality in our way of thinking in order to break free from this notion that you are just a diseased person with a baby inside of you, like a Elon Musk incubator or something
Mm.
that can be deconstructed through surgery and pharmaceuticals and put back together. That is a very profitable way of looking at human beings, but it's deeply, deeply materialistic and reductive in the sense that they don't even want you to remember that there is this angelic essence to you. And that's where I think I hit a dead end because people,
Mm.
I'll talk about Lucifer and Armand. People are like, "You're talking about the devil," and I'm like, "No, I'm not." Like, this goes back to that fear that was set in me. Like, no, I'm not. I'm not. I'm not even afraid of that. What I actually want is more of that. I actually want us to have more of that. This spirituality being taken out of the birth experience was the original corruption. That was the original sin, so to speak, that has led us down a path where it's very, very hard to now get out of that hole.
Mhm.
Um, but anyways, go on. I'm going to pass the ball back to you. What do you
I
think?
think I understand what you're saying, that you're looking at the Lucifer experience from that perspective to be like, wow, that much must have really sucked that he got to this point where he was envying God and God is like, you're out of here. I mean, that's kind of like kicking your kid out to the street, right? Like, I created you, but you're not doing good right now.
Yeah.
And for him to kind of go down and lead this path to corruption. I actually recently had a conversation with my dad about this because my dad loves to talk theological things. And he said, every time I come to your
I bet he
house,
does.
we always got to talk about, this deep stuff. And I go, well, I have one for you. Do you ever feel like Lucifer feels bad? Do you ever feel like maybe he has repented
Yeah.
or said, I'm tired of being the bad guy. I don't want to be this person anymore. We talked for 2 hours, 3 hours about that. But I do want to add one more kind of layer
Sure.
to this because it says in Genesis that when the flood happened and everyone was killed, so including these hybrid creatures, these Nephilim, their spirits left their bodies to roam the earth. So the spirit of the Nephilim didn't die in the flood, their physical bodies did. And this is the argument behind demons. When I use the
Mhm.
word demons, that it says spirit of originally watchers came to earth, became hybrids, Nephilim, if you're following this trail. And this is kind of where the conversation can turn to what talking about like generational curses and things of that nature.
Mm.
Because if you think about it from that perspective, these spirits were originally in heaven and now, you know, well, their origin started in heaven and then they became something else. And so that is the idea behind there being spiritual people that are not communing or communicating with spirits that are angelic directly with God. Let's just say it that way. So, for example, and this is what maybe I might refer to someone being in like new age. I don't know if you want to refer to it as that, like a psychic medium who is communicating with, they're saying that they're communicating with the dead. But we are told in our Bibles that when someone is dead, they are asleep. Technically, this is a whole other conversation that the church doesn't have. And we can kind of sidestep some of this stuff too. But I think that the church does a very poor job. All denominations, both Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant churches do a very poor job in talking about these things and having these conversations. And it's why people say things like that child said to you, "Oh, you're not baptized, you're going to hell." It's not it's not how this works. We don't have these big conversations, and because we don't have these big conversations, it can leave people very confused and wondering, well, wait, this doesn't make sense, or why doesn't this make sense? There's more to it. Um, Shoot, now I forgot where I was going with that before. Just
You were talking
rewind my
about
brain.
it was an N word. I can't remember. It was
Oh,
the
new age and mediums. Okay. So there are quite a number of people that you could follow on Instagram. One of them that I think does a really good job communicating about this is Jen Niza. Her handle's X Psychic Saved. And she was a psychic medium for decades, for a long time. And she thought she was communicating with light, that she was communicating with, the dead loved ones of relatives or whatnot. But she learned over time, because she kept having these crazy bad experiences, that she was communicating with demonic spirits, i.e., Nephilim spirits. And the reason they knew so much about the families wasn't because it was a dead grandparent, but it was because it was a generational demon that had been hanging around. And I'm using the word demon. I know it sounds kind of
Sure. Yeah.
scary, but I don't know what other word to use. It's kind of it. That has been hanging around for a long time, right? Like hanging around for years and years. And so it knows things about you. And I've had a lot of people on this podcast that have shared their testimonies. And one in particular, I think her episode actually just went live, the first half of it last week, where she had this experience with her son. And she said something to me like, this demon knew me. He knew what I would do. He knew what my response would be. And I've heard things like that before from people who have had these spiritual experiences. It's like they are being watched for a period of time and they're being spiritually attacked. Now, the other thing that I've noticed about folks that have these kinds of experiences is it's mostly people that are seeking to know God or learn more about God or who He is that end up having these attacks. People that are just living in the world, like drinking and carrying on and doing whatever they're going to do, those those type of folks don't usually have these kinds of experiences, or at least don't attribute it to that until something serious happens. And that
Like
was
what?
kind of
Like a near
the
death
example.
experience or something?
Well, just like hitting rock bottom, I guess you could say.
Mm.
Our guest last week, her name was Jessica, or I don't know when this, what order the episodes will be in, but the episode with Jessica, she said, I was just living my life. She was involved with psychic mediums and Ouija boards and all this stuff. And she said, it took having literal spiritual experiences, like where she was hearing roaring, things in her house were being moved. And then everybody thought she was crazy. Everybody's like, are you on drugs? You need to get drug tested. What is wrong with you? And she's like, I'm not on anything. She even got tested just to prove that she wasn't on any drugs. And she was just having these spiritual experiences with the supernatural. So, anyway, that's a lot to just put out here at this, but I can corroborate some of this because I had a very spiritual, what I consider to be a spiritual attack when I was having my first home birth. And it was to me what felt like an enemy attack. And this is why it kind of comes back to talking about God, because there isn't, if we're going to think about God as being the father of humanity, we are created in his image. He created women for men, for marriage, go forth and multiply, to have children, to have relationship together, to build families, and then so on and so forth, right? Repeat this process. Then what's the opposite of that? Divorce, ruin the family. And if you put this tension and this pain and this hardship between husband and wife, mother and father, then now the child has experienced trauma that now influences the future of the child. The child goes into adulthood all messed up, and then the cycle of dysfunction repeats. So it's kind of like, if we want to look at it from that perspective. And I'll just give you the shortest version ever. But I was going into my second birth, which I had my first in the hospital. It was horrible, the like worst experience ever. And after that, I felt the Lord say, don't go. Like, just don't. I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? I'm pregnant again, but I don't want to go through this. He's like, don't go, stay home. And it was hard because I was conditioned or programmed for so many years that this is how you do things, right? Like I wasn't raised in this environment. My mom did have me in a birthing center, but I didn't grow up with this conditioning that home birth was the way. And so I at first was going to an male OB-GYN because he was the one guy in town that was the VBAC guy. And I had had a C-section, an unnecessary with my first. And every time I walked in there, it was like I heard the Lord's voice going, get out of here. What are you doing here? You don't belong here. This is not the place for you. And I kept going until one visit, I met with a new midwife. And the first thing she says to me is, so what are you going to do about your vaccines? What are you going to do about whatever it was? I don't know, DTaP and COVID or something. And I was like, I ain't never coming back here, lady. Like, you're
Mm-hmm.
going to even ask me about vaccines? That we are not aligned. I'm done. I'm out. And
Why are Christians in particular in our country, why are they um, very much in some circles like leading the charge against the vaccine movement? You know where I stand on vaccines, I presume.
that's,
So,
yeah, that's a good question. I wouldn't say that it is a Christian. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's a Christian doctrine that has been adopted because I don't really know very many people at my own church that I attend that agree with me on this. Most
mm,
still think that vaccines are safe and effective and do stuff and are positive. So I wouldn't say that culturally it is something that is pervasive amongst the church, but I will say that there are groups and pockets of people that have had experiences or are close enough to other people that have had experiences that have turned away from it. For me personally, I have been so burned and my eyes have been like peeled open to some things inside the medical system that I never intended to go down this path, right? Like I never was like, I'm going to be an anti-vaxxer. I'm going to be against the medical model. I'm never going to a OB-GYN appointment again in my life. That was not what I set out to do. But because of some experiences that I had in the system, it's opened my eyes and changed my heart in a lot of ways. I would almost say that like I don't even know anything about Jehovah's Witness. I really don't. The only thing that I know is they don't believe in secular medical care. You know, like they'll be like, no, just let me die. And I'm
well,
basically right there with the Jehovah's
what
Witness.
do you mean
Like,
secular? What do you mean by secular medical care?
the industrial medical complex that doesn't, it's not built on a foundation of God.
Oh, I see.
You know what I mean?
Well, I
Like
mean, they still
a
come in, but
hospital.
they don't want like blood transfusions and whatnot for sure. But we've
True,
had a
true.
lot, we've had a lot of them in our C-sections and whatnot. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
How do you answer this then?
Mhm.
Like, hmm. So I'm also, as I mentioned, also hospice and palliative care. And depending on the denomination of Christianity, some people would say, this is God's like well, let's say in the birth space, we're playing God by overly intervening in an otherwise natural process.
Mhm.
But on the other end of the spectrum, so to speak, at the end of life, a lot of people would say, who are we to play God by not doing all of these interventions? God gave us those skills to keep people alive. So like
Mhm.
which one are they in conflict with one another, those two approaches, or am I just missing
Yeah.
something?
That's a good question. I've thought about this a lot because people ask me this stuff all the time because I'm kind
Yeah.
of becoming more drastic in my own personal views. Now everybody's going to do whatever they're going to do, right? And I would never, say my way is right. But if I were to look at, I'm using my own grandma, for example, who has passed away. She was on 30 medications a day
Yeah.
before she died for 2 decades.
Mm.
There is no doubt that those medications kept her alive. But for what? She lived in an assisted living facility. She was by herself. We would visit her when we could, but it was very sad to see that that was the life that she was being kept alive to live, to watch her TV, watch the news, watch cops every day for 15 years. Is that the way that God intended us to live our lives? Is to just stay alive, to just bare minimum watch TV for 15 more years? Now, on the other hand, you could say, well, if she didn't have those medications, she could have lived as long, but been in a lot of pain because let's say she had arthritis or whatever the case might be. And I think this is where the conversation comes back to why it's so important for us to learn about our bodies when we're young and how to keep them healthy before we get to that point. Now, every body is going to break down. And this is a big problem that I have with society as a whole, and especially in women's circles, is this: I never want to get a wrinkle. I never want to sag. I don't want my body to change. And we're in this huge culture of cosmetic surgery now where everybody's just like,
Yeah.
oh, I'll just laser it away, nip tuck it away. If we were meant to stay the same, we would, you know, like our bodies are supposed to age. That is part of life. And now I'm saying this before I'm going through a lot of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it's easy for me to say, and one day I'm going to be humbled when I'm getting all wrinkly to say, all these anti-aging serums and all this stuff that's out there. But the point is, like, we are meant to degenerate. We are meant to break down. There is some there are some things that I think that we can do to nourish and provide for our bodies. And that kind of goes back to this whole idea of, I'll use my mother-in-law again. What does she need? She needs someone to come in and help her learn about what to eat so that she's not eating all of these inflammatory foods that are causing her. I mean, she's borderline diabetic.
Yeah.
Like, that's what is needed here, is to, as a community and as a people, to come together and say, well, what can we do differently, or what can we do better? And this is kind of, a beef that I think that most of us that are outside of the system now, especially with home birth, have about birth when it comes to preeclampsia specifically. They'll say, well, we don't know why people get preeclampsia. We don't know why this happens. Yes, you do. It's because people don't take care of themselves. It's because
Yeah.
people don't eat enough protein. They don't have healthy diets. And then, but by the time it's too late, oh, she has preeclampsia. And then all of a sudden it's a reason to deliver a baby early when she's been in the same state of malnutrition for the whole pregnancy. It doesn't make any sense. But that's not a conversation that's being had in
Mm.
the hospital system enough. They might give you a piece of paper that was like a photocopy that says, like, eat healthy,
Sure.
but that's not a real conversation. It's not like, go get real food for pregnancy, or go read up on the brewer's diet, or go, check out these things. There's not a priority and a focus to that. And so I don't know that this answers your question, but my personal stance is, if I had to take 30 medications to stay alive, I would rather just go.
Yeah. And there
Get
was a
me out
part
of
of
here.
that. Yeah, totally. There was a
I
um
got somebody to meet anyway, right?
yeah,
If I'm a
yeah,
believer, like, what do I want to be here for?
that's true. Yeah. So so if you so most of my family on both sides were Christian,
Mhm,
and when you know every year we would lose another family member would pass away, and after they die we have the wake. We go to the we all drive in a line all the way to the cemetery, and then ubiquitously, every single person I've that has died in my life has been embalmed, put into some nice clothes, and then they're put into a lead-lined casket, and then that's put into a concrete tomb. So you had said that it's natural for our bodies to degrade and to fall apart. But it
mhm,
seems like all of that, like pomp and circumstance when we pass away, it
mhm,
seems like that's actually the opposite.
mm,
Like heaven forbid we get reabsorbed back into the soil from
mhm,
whence we came. Um,
mhm.
and
From
I'm
dust we
curious, like,
begin, and dust we will
yeah,
go.
yeah, why do all that other stuff? Why,
That's
as a Christian
ritualistic.
nation?
That's
Yeah,
ritualistic. That's ritual stuff. I never experienced, honestly, any funerals like I did until my husband was raised Catholic, and until I met him and started going to Catholic wakes, and I was like, whoa, this is crazy. I've
no,
never,
yeah,
it's just a very
like a whole day.
ritualistic. There are certain denominations, and this is why I don't like to make faith and being a believer in Jesus Christ and of God, of the Bible, that's the focus, not the religiosity side,
Yeah, yeah,
because people are humans and we perverse everything. And we have to make everything into this extra, and that's what I think that I think that it's sweet that people like to have respect when someone dies, but there is a lot of ritual around it that does, it's not biblical. And that's what I always go back to. You'll hear me say that a lot. Like, is that biblical? Does it say in the Bible that you need to do these things? Because we're told that we don't have to do anything, that there are no rules when it comes to, being free in Christ, that we as believers in him, yes, if you truly believe he is who he is and that you're following him, you're going to make better choices in life. It's not to say that you can go do anything you want, as in, kill people and all that. It's to say you don't want to do those things. But then all the other stuff, it's just fluff. And that's what I think takes away from, I think that takes away from God, and it takes away from his story when there is all this fluff on the sides to say, like, we got to have the fancy casket and the this and the, like, none of that stuff matters. None of it.
Yeah, right.
And I
Seems like a
used to hear that too,
distraction or
like, oh,
something.
they're going to say a mass. Great. What is that? That's not going to do anything. Ultimately, at the end of the day, each one of us is going to stand before the Lord for judgment. And he's the one that's going to have the final call. And there's also, you'll hear a lot of people say, like, oh, I'm just, let's say someone had a lot of pain at the end of their life. They'll say, like, I'm so glad that they aren't in pain anymore and that they're in heaven sitting next to Jesus. And technically, that is not true, because technically, heaven isn't open, hell isn't open. Technically, we are waiting, if we believe in the Bible and what's going to happen next in the book of Revelation. Judgment day hasn't come. Jesus is going to come back. He's going to live on the earth for 1,000 years. And so everyone that is dead is asleep, if we were to look at it from a technical perspective, from a biblical perspective. Now, it makes us feel good to say, oh, that person is with Jesus. But I mean, I hate to say it like this. It's kind of like the Matrix, if you think about it. You know how Neo like wakes up and he's in that water bath tube. That's kind of all
Yeah,
of us. Everyone that's passed away, they're wherever they died, in a sense, until they are going to be waken up. And it's not as pretty as we like to think of it. But we also have a totally messed up view of what angels look like. We think that angels are like these cute little babies with little butts and, little cherubs. That's not what angels look like. If you look at it from a biblical perspective, they're pretty scary looking.
yeah.
And this whole conversation right now in the world of like drones and is it aliens, and angels are pretty alien looking. If you, I don't know if you've ever seen, there's an account called the AI Bible, and
I don't think so.
it takes scripture, biblical scripture, and descriptions of angels. Or, I mean, think about these experiences that people have had with angels. What do they say every time? They were frightened. They were afraid because it was
Yeah,
scary.
yeah.
And so they take the descriptions like in Isaiah and they plug the description and from Revelation into this AI builder, and it shows what an
That's pretty
angel
wild.
really would look like. And it's crazy.
Hmm.
Anyway,
All right, let me, do you, this is actually very fun for me because you're so well spoken and you've thought so much about this. And sometimes I don't have the courage to bring some of these questions up. So I appreciate you playing with me here. Um, do you see any, uh, we're going to go back to what you just said about, we know that angels look like this. Um, but when you think about the medical system and what you don't like about the medical system, so like, let me say when people describe the medical system as we're playing God and we're trying to hijack the system and not allow things to happen naturally the way God had created us.
mm-hmm.
Um, you brought up like the elegance of DNA.
Mm.
Here's one of the problems I have with this whole construct is how do we know that DNA operates the way that we were taught that DNA works? And
That's a really,
that's yeah,
yeah.
go ahead. It's not a question for you to answer, but it's something
Mm-hmm.
for you and others to think about. Because I'm not sure how we can ever say for sure how that works. And that's a
Yes,
big
that,
problem why I've become so
yeah.
married to these basic biological principles. Like I don't want to be married to that because I'm not sure that it's true.
That's actually a really great question because I ask the same thing all the time of everything. My husband is super duper into space. And
Yeah,
I love to just poke the bear and be like, well, how do you even know that space is what you think it is? Just because
right.
someone's told you? You've never been there. So how do you
Yeah,
know? How do
right,
you know that this planet is X size and is next to this and that? Like you don't. And that's the thing with all of these complexities to our body. Like you
mm,
said, DNA, how do we know that DNA is exactly, I mean, how do we know that germs are what they say that germs are?
right, right.
There's this whole conversation now about, there's germ theory. And then now it's, well, something happened to you and you're having an experience as a result of your trauma to that experience. And germs are just, don't mean anything. We don't know. I think that you're
Right.
right in that. There are some pretty cool scientific facts in the Bible. And the one that I turn to the most is in Leviticus. It says that the life of the body is in the blood. And it's this
Yeah.
idea that the most important thing about us as humans and being in these humanly bodies is our blood and the health of our blood. And there's this really great naturopath doctor, an iridologist. His practice is called Spirit of Health. His name's Dr. Vaughn. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
Okay.
He's really, really good in this area and talking about God's design for our bodies and our health and stuff like that. And one thing that he says is a lot of times, we use blood panels to try to figure out what's going on with someone. But sometimes someone's blood can be healthy because our blood was meant to stay healthy and keep us alive. And it can be something else. And we have to dive a little bit deeper into a deeper layer and into a deeper level past the blood. Let's say, an organ is struggling because it's blocked up, that the filter is blocked. And so there are constructs that are biblical or scientific things that are biblical. We're not given all the answers. And I don't think that we were meant to, honestly. I don't think that we were meant to fully understand this stuff. There's a mystery to it that I don't need to have all of the answers. And I think that that's why I've been able to step outside of the medical system for birth, is because a lot of it is unlearning and learning to not fear and be afraid. I did a survey for this episode. Thank you for sharing it in your stories, by the way, where I asked people that home birth and people that don't home birth, what questions would you want me to ask Nathan? And I'm sure you get
Interesting.
this one a lot, but one of them was, what about, let me find it on my list here. What about if there's an emergency? And that's the number
Mm.
one thing that people say to me when I tell them, like, I just birth at home. I just go upstairs and have this baby in my bathroom. They're like, I would be so scared. I would be so afraid that something bad would happen. And I think that that's the difference with where faith comes in and where God comes into it for me. Because regardless of whether something happens or it doesn't happen, it's in his plan. He told me that already. I know the plans that I have for you. And none of us are told that we're going to live forever. None of us are told we're going to live a happy life. There's this pursuit of happiness. There's nowhere in the Bible that it's like, my goal for you guys down here on earth is to be happy. It's not. So that is an easy one. And we're not told we're going to have health. We're not told anything. We're not promised any of these positive, affirmative things that all of us want. And I think that's why women are so scared to step outside of it, because you're taking the gamble essentially on what does God have planned for my life. I'm either going to live or I'm not. And I think that you have to be at that point, honestly, in order to
Yeah,
fully release and do something like have a free birth, because you have to be
yeah.
okay with the alternative either way. And I think specifically she said, oh, here it is. What is the plan if there's a true emergency? For example, I'm 45 minutes away from our hospital, our ER and L&D. And this isn't to say that free birthers should be stupid and not learn about birth. That's actually the opposite of what I say here is do your study, talk to midwives, talk to doulas, talk to other free birthers, home birthers, join communities. We're not going to just know this stuff because we were never taught it. It comes from community. And some of it comes from intuition, but some of it, there's a bunch of books that I got just because I wanted to learn, what did this person say about this? Like Heather Baker, she wrote Home Birth on Your Own Terms, and I wanted to know, what does she say about emergency scenarios? And I may or may not do or agree with everything that she says, but I'm going to educate myself on those potential situations, especially since, so I didn't finish this rest of my story about home birth, but I was with an OB-GYN, and then I went
Oh
to a
yeah.
home birth midwife, and then she dropped me when I was 35 weeks pregnant because I finally got the operations report from my original C-section, which was like 2.5 years prior. After getting cleared, by the way, she sent me to the hospital that I had this baby at to get my scars checked, which I went through with her requests because I had to, or else she would drop me then. And they cleared me to VBAC, got the report, and then it was basically in detail what happened. So she knew that I had a C-section. She knew that I had hysterotomy extensions and that the doctor cut my bladder during the C-section. But for her to
Yeah.
read it, and that they put on the last line of the operations report, not a candidate for TOLAC due to hysterotomy extensions. And now what's interesting is the VBAC OB-GYN guy that I had originally gone to, she went to his office to ask him for advice because she was trying to see what other people would do. What would you do in this situation? Because the lady at the hospital that um, I originally went to, that I'm really skipping over a lot of facts here. I had a scar check. It was done by an OB-GYN that hates home birth, but is semi supposedly supportive of VBAC, right? When I was leaving the room, she said, "Is there anything else that I can do to help you?" And I was like, "Oh, actually, I haven't gotten my full medical history. We've requested it from you guys for months. What's the best way for me to get this?" And she said, "Oh, you got to call," which is what we already did. I was at the hospital. So I just went
Mm.
down to records, requested the records, waited, and got them. I also pulled the records for my daughter because I wanted to see. I was very scared because was very much like, don't vaccinate her, don't give her vitamin K or any of that
Yeah.
stuff. And I was scared because I've heard that some people will do it anyway and then write it down. They didn't, fortunately. So anyway, I get the report. I take a picture of it, a screenshot. I text it to my midwife. She calls me maybe an hour later, and she said that that doctor that I had seen for the scar check, she said I was good to VBAC, but she told my midwife, "You should care her out because she had hysterotomy extensions. And so that's a risk factor, a higher risk, puts her at higher risk for uterine rupture." And even though I was willing to take the risk, my midwife, I think I was maybe her sixth or seventh VBAC at that point, she wasn't willing to take the risk. And so she said, "Sorry." And she was upset about it. She wasn't like cold about it or anything like that. But I always kind of had this feeling that she was going to carry me out. I don't know why. I just did. And so when I went to my appointments with her, man, I talked for those full hour that she would give me for those appointments. I was asking questions because I knew
Mm.
I needed to know what was in her brain. And there was a reason behind it because I ended up having to make the choice. Either I was going to go to a hospital or I was going to have a free birth because I no longer had a midwife. And I had a free birth. And it was awesome. And it was this totally God-filled experience, but it was, I feel like, spiritual attack on attack. The fact that, I mean, I'm almost to the end, 35 going on 36 weeks. My home birth midwife drops me. Suddenly, that means I also don't have a birth pool now, which was one of the things that I really had wanted to do. I ordered a birth pool. I just straight up bought a, midwife birth pool from In His Hands or whatever website it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
And as we were going into that last week, things felt really weird between my husband and I. And mind you, like, this is the person that I'm planning on doing birth with now. Like, I got no more midwife. She's gone. I did have a doula that was supportive of what I was doing, but she also was very tied to the medical system in many ways. She was used to most of her births were at hospitals, some of them were home births, so she wasn't entirely comfortable with my situation. And yeah, so I'm depending on my husband for a lot of this, right? And then some things come out in that last week. We're all sitting on the couch. My mom had come in because she was going to help with my oldest daughter. She was 2 at the time when I went into labor. And I just felt like things were off with my husband. And my mom had handed his phone to me and I was going to hand it to him. And like it swiped when I was, got handed it. And there was this app on there that was new. I'm like, what's this about? And it was, one of those streaming music apps where people like sit behind their computers and do music or whatever. But every person he was following was just like totally inappropriate. And I'm like, what is up with this? So we end up, talking about that over the course of a couple of days. But there was just this nudging that like there's something more here. There's something else going on. And I just had a deep intuition about it, but I couldn't explain it. The day I went into labor, I was awoken at 3 o'clock in the morning and a voice says to me, you need to go look at his phone and look at files specifically. Click on files. And, you get that like heart racing feeling. I felt like I was going to throw up. I'm like, I don't want to do it. I'm too scared of what I might find, kind of thing. And then I got up and I walk around the bed and I open his phone and I click on files. And it was like his phone had screenshotted a couple of instances where he had been looking at porn. And that was something that's not, we don't do that in our relationship. And that had been something early on that I had thought we worked through. And so, of course, I'm just like, what? And it was sad, scary, and kind of like creepy at the same time that this voice told me to do this and then it was right. And so I kept saying, I don't know if this is from God or the devil that this is getting exposed, but it was very upsetting. Right. And so
Yeah, of course.
I'm like all bent out of shape about this. And then I go into labor. My water breaks. Like I start trickling and I was sitting on the toilet just like, because I couldn't even, I would have had to keep changing my diapers at this point. Sitting on the toilet, I call my sister and it's like, how do you have a baby at home, just you and the person that has been essentially lying to you and not telling you the truth for however long? That's what's going on through my head is like, this is crazy. This is the most important pivotal moment. And now this just blew up. And my sister she's usually the co-host on this podcast, but she doesn't always come for everything because she's got little kids too. And she's kind of hard to get
Yeah.
these days. But she is a very strong woman of God. And she said, this is an attack. This is a spiritual attack on your family in this moment right now to tear you and your husband apart. Because what does the enemy want? He wants to destroy this birth experience that you're about to have by separating you from your husband. And, obviously she went on for a long time with more detail and examples and things like that. But she said something like, you just need to pre-forgive him. Pre-forgive him for this situation, put it on the back shelf, and you guys address this later. Pray over him and all that good stuff. And so that's what I did. That was the only choice, right? Like, what am I going to fight with him about this while I'm having a baby? I needed to get my head in the game. And it just was never more clear to me that there is a spiritual side to birth than in that moment when I was being literally attacked to pull me and him apart at the most important time that could ever be for having this baby. It's not like this happened. Could have happened a week before, and then we've just been fighting for a week leading up to this, but it happened the day I went into labor, which is like, it was just these constant little things to try to pull me away from birthing at home is how I felt in, looking at these experiences. And instead of succumbing to them and saying like, you know what, I give up. I'm just going to go to the hospital. They're going to take care of me over there. I was like, no, we're going to do this. We know what we're doing. We're ready. We're going to do this. And I'll tell you, he was great. I jokingly call him midwife Mike. because he really helped me through that whole experience. And we birthed this baby. Well, I birthed the baby. He got his screamed in his ear, solid 3 times. But we had the baby at home, and it was a reawakening for me. It was an awakening moment in my spiritual journey. And I think why I feel so strongly about God being in the conversation, because there is a dark and a light. There is a battle that we are fighting against, and it is not something that we necessarily can see. I'm going to pull up um, a verse because I can never remember exactly what it is. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." And that one really resonates with me because it was something that I couldn't see at all that was communicating to me, that was like stirring the pot, like, let's tear this up, let's tear this apart. And I think that so I would argue that there are dark forces that sit across different communities and across different things. Like, I think that the pornography institution, whatever you want to call it, the whole industry is darkness. Most people that go into that line of work experience some sort of sexual trauma as a child, or some sort of emotional trauma between them and a parent or both parents or a sibling or a partner. And a lot of that stuff stems from hurt in the first place, and then hurt people, go through and over sexualize, and then it draws people and draws them away from their marriages and their happy relationships. And then it's, in my opinion, just so much deeper than that. And the amount of women, I'm in this biblical group for women, there's maybe 100,000 women in it. And the amount of women's stories that I see come through that are pornography related with their spouse, it's crazy. It's a battle, man. Like, it's a real attack and a real battle on our relationships right now, and that, yeah.
Yeah. I gotta say, there's a couple of things that have come up in the conversation. The first is that there's this uniquely monotheistic religious percept about how things are,
Mm.
and that is tied to this notion that women are here for men to
Mm.
procreate and everything else. So there's that part of the Christian theology that I think I actually think plays a big part in how we manipulate, childbirth and whatnot. But also, most of my friends, all of them were Christian. They all had issues with pornography. There was a lot of shame around these what were thought to be unnatural feelings come up. And, as a mother, how do you raise children and tell them, hey, those feelings that you actually like have these like unnatural feelings and it feels good to touch parts of your body? Like, how do you reconcile that without them feeling the shame and the guilt and wanting to go and do it anyways? And then they turn
Mm.
their back on religion because the religious leaders tell them it's not right to have those feelings. They become shameful, then they hide it from their spouse in the future, and then we say, no, that was the devil. Or was it just that we didn't have a healthy expression of sexuality? Like, even childbirth is a pretty sexual experience. and
Yeah.
and I want to let me provide some clarification there. There's very few instances in which we as adults are like awe-inspired, and childbirth is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's awe-inspiring in part because it's such an intimate environment. I am
Mm-hmm.
sitting between open legs with naked genitalia, and there's a baby coming out of it.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, in order for me to not be a creepy male OB-GYN, I can't speak about this as a sexual experience because it's not for me. It's not for the woman giving birth, and it's not for the man necessarily. But the act of conception required a very, very deep sexual intimacy.
Mhm.
And for me as a stranger, I have to now sit in the place where this baby was conceived and I have to
Mhm.
receive the baby. Or the dad can receive the baby, but I'm like kind of there. And I'm not supposed to see, I'm supposed to objectify this in the same way that it sounds to me like women are sort of objectified in this dichotomy of the male and female relationship in a marriage under God.
Mhm.
So, it's rife with issues. Little boys and little girls probably are growing up feeling very ashamed around their sexuality. And I don't mean homosexuality. I mean like wanting to have sex and enjoy sex. Like, isn't that like not cool within the church? So unless you're doing it for the sake of having babies. So of course there's that temptation there. But I guess what you're saying is that that temptation is coming not from God. That temptation is coming from the devil, and it is our job or your husband's job to push back on that temptation. Am I hearing that right?
Yes and no. God created his body, right? And he created his body to have sexual sensation. And that's pretty cool, actually. Like, thanks, God.
Yeah,
That's nice
yeah,
that we can enjoy and appreciate each other. But we are actually told in the Bible that our bodies, and it says it both directions. It says that a woman's body is for her husband, and her husband's body is for his wife. And so we are directed at what to do with that. And I think that that is where this whole purity culture thing comes from. And a lot of millennials have been damaged by the whole purity culture rhetoric that, wait until you're married, do the promise ring, your promise to God until you're married. And yes, it can and has created a lot of shame for a lot of people. And listen, I didn't do things the right way. My husband and I, oh, sorry, mom and dad, if you're listening. I'm just kidding. We are not perfect people. We didn't wait until we were married. This is where everybody stops listening. No, I'm just kidding. But look at that is how many in the Christian culture and society, it's like, oh, we'll judge you. And so when it comes to this idea of pornography and temptation and all that, yes, men were built with their own sex drives, as were women. But we are told what to do with those sex drives, and that is to use it on each other. And anything outside of that is outside of our design and what we're supposed to do. And, I have my own qualms with that whole industry just because of the objectification of women and what it's done to women and all that. There's many, many layers to the pornography conversation. But it damages the relationship between a man and a woman because how is a woman supposed to be her most vulnerable if she feels like she can't be? And this is something that I hear a lot from women that have been on a similar side, you know, of that their husband was looking at porn or whatever the case might be, is they now have a hard time connecting. So now what has pornography done? It has disconnected a couple from the most important sacred act that they could do with each other, which is give their body to the other person. Now, I'm very fortunate in that my perspective on this is that it's not about me. And that's how I'm able to not continue to make this an ongoing thing. My husband and I went through that incident, right? But it doesn't matter what I look like or who I am. I could be Kim Kardashian. And I've actually used this example before because when Kim was married to Kanye, he had a porn problem. And he was married to Kim Kardashian,
mm,
who everyone is trying to look like Kim Kardashian because she's, this person that everybody wants to look like or whatever. It's just an example that this is not about me and my husband, him looking at porn. He was looking at porn long before he knew me. Since he was 12, whatever age he was exposed to it in the first place. And this becomes a question about what do you do with that feeling? When you have those feelings, what do you do next? And what are you pursuing? And so we're told that even lusting after another woman is considered adultery in the Bible. So if we're going to look to the Bible, technically, then that's adultery. But, am I going to strangle him around the neck and be like, you committed adultery? This is over because you looked at pornography? No. My relationship with him has value, and I believe in grace, and I believe in forgiveness, and I believe that we all make mistakes, and all of us, have the ability to look at all the stuff that we do against God, and how many times has he forgiven us?
Mm,
Look at all, I mean, it's very much, I liken it to a parental relationship. Like, now that I'm a mom, thinking about, do I stop loving my kids because they don't listen to me? No, they just
mm,
don't listen. Now imagine what it must be like for God. Not only do we not listen to him, we don't read his book, we don't read what he's trying to teach us. And then when we do, we're like, I don't know.
mm,
All right, friends, as you are hearing, Nathan and I are really getting into the nitty-gritty of a lot of topics today, but we're not done just yet. And I am very grateful for Nathan's willingness to listen to my rants and tangents. I am recording this segment right now after having re-listened to our conversation. And listen, I've got to apologize to everyone, Nathan especially, for said tangents. With that said, if you're into that, and into this. There's more to come. So stay tuned. Next week, we are going to discuss male practitioners in the birth space, as well as why Nathan left hospital birth and more. So, again, stay tuned if you'd like to continue on the journey. And as always, thank you for tuning in and for being on this journey with us. If you would like to find Nathan outside of the podcast, you can do so on Instagram at Nathan Riley, OB-GYN, or at bornfreemethod.com. And of course, if you'd like to join the mission, the Radiant Mission, you can do so on Instagram, Facebook, or on YouTube. And today we are going to close with John 16:33. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. We're wishing you a radiant week, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.